The Lonely Planet and the Hungry Cub. The man walked alone under the strange red sky. His name was Daniel, a human explorer who had crashed on this unknown planet. His ship was broken, his radio was silent, and no help was coming. He had only a small bag of supplies, and even those were running out. The air was thin, the ground dry, and the trees were tall with glowing blue leaves that whispered in the wind. He was tired, hungry, and thirsty, but he kept walking because to stop meant to die. Daniel looked around and felt like the world itself was watching him. Every sound from the forest made him tense. Every shadow made him fear. He knew he was not alone. He could feel eyes on him, though he saw nothing clear. He pushed forward, hoping to find shelter or maybe water. But instead, he heard something else. It was a cry, soft and weak, almost like the sound of a child. Daniel stopped, his heart racing. The cry came again from behind the thick bushes. He carefully moved closer, pushing aside glowing leaves. And then he saw it. A small creature lay on the ground, its body thin and weak. It had fur that shimmered silver in the light, and its big round eyes glowed faintly. The creature looked like a cub, maybe of some alien beast. Its tiny chest rose and fell as it breathed with effort. It was starving, and it looked at Daniel with fear and hope together. Daniel froze. He knew this was dangerous. Where there was a cub, there was a parent, and if the parent returned, it could kill him in a heartbeat. But his heart softened when he saw the little creature. It was too weak to stand, too weak to even cry louder. He felt pity, the same pity he would feel for a hungry child. Slowly, Daniel opened his bag. Inside was a small piece of dried ration bar, one of his last. He looked at it, then at the cub. He knew he needed this food to live, but he could not ignore the suffering eyes of the creature. With a sigh, he broke the ration into small pieces and placed them on the ground. Then he stepped back, moving slowly, not wanting to scare it. The cub sniffed the air, its nose twitching. Hesitantly, it crawled forward, then grabbed the food with its small mouth. It chewed slowly, as if it had never tasted such food before. Then it ate faster, desperate and hungry. Daniel watched, a strange feeling in his chest. He had shared his survival with an alien being, and for a moment, he felt less alone. But then, the forest grew silent. The air felt heavy. The glowing leaves stopped rustling, as if the whole world held its breath. Daniel's skin crawled, his heart pounded in his chest. He looked around, sensing danger close. From the shadows, a sound came. Low, deep, like thunder rolling through the earth. The cub froze too, its ears twitching, eyes wide. Daniel knew at once. This was no ordinary sound. It was the sound of power, of a predator, of a mother. The ground shook slightly as something heavy moved through the trees. Branches cracked, the blue leaves trembled. And then he saw her. A massive creature stepped out of the shadows. Her body was strong, covered in dark striped fur that shimmered like metal under the red sky. Her eyes glowed bright yellow, sharp and intelligent. Her teeth were long, her claws like blades. She was a tigress, but not like any tiger from Earth. She was larger, fiercer, more terrifying, and she was the mother of the cub. The cub cried softly and ran to her, pressing against her leg. She looked down at it, then up at Daniel. Her growl shook the ground, a sound filled with warning and rage. Daniel froze, his body stiff with fear. He knew he could not run. He knew he could not fight. He was standing in front of a beast that could end him in a single strike. The tigress lowered her head, sniffed the air, and stepped closer. Her glowing eyes locked on Daniel's face. She could smell her cub's scent on him. She could smell the food. Daniel's hands trembled, his heart thundered. The cub mewed, licking her leg, showing the food in its mouth. The tigress paused, her growl fading to a low rumble. She did not attack, not yet. She only watched him, studying, deciding. Daniel stood frozen, waiting for death. But instead of leaping at him, the tigress let out one final roar that shook the trees. Then, with her cub close at her side, she turned and walked back into the forest. Daniel gasped for air, his knees weak. He had just met the fiercest creature of this world, and somehow he was still alive. But deep inside, he knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The fierce mother appears. Daniel stood frozen, his breath stuck in his throat. The giant tigress moved like a shadow of muscle and power, each step pressing into the soil, each claw leaving marks that glowed faintly in the strange ground. Her eyes burned yellow, not just with anger, but with thought, as if she was more than an animal. The cub stayed close to her side, looking back at Daniel as if asking her not to hurt him. The tigress let out a slow rumble that made the trees shake. Daniel felt the sound inside his chest, heavy like thunder pressing against his ribs. He wanted to run, but his legs were locked. His body knew running would only make him prey. So he stood, silent, still like stone. The tigress lowered her head and sniffed the ground where Daniel had placed the food. Her nose twitched, her tongue flicked, tasting the scent. Then she raised her gaze back to him, sharp and unblinking. Her breath steamed in the cold air, hot and heavy. She took a step closer, and Daniel's heart hammered. One more step, and he could feel her warmth against his skin. The cub gave a small cry and nudged her paw. It looked up at her, then back at Daniel, as if trying to explain. The tigress tilted her head slightly, a strange expression in her eyes, not blind fury, not blind hunger, something else. It was curiosity, and that made it even more terrifying. Daniel whispered to himself, "Easy, I meant no harm." The sound of his own voice surprised him, small and weak compared to her growl. The tigress twitched her ears at the sound, like she was listening. She let out another low growl, softer this time, but filled with warning. The meaning was clear. You live only because I allow it. Daniel slowly opened his hands, showing they were empty. He took one careful step back, not to flee, but to show respect. The tigress watched, her eyes glowing brighter in the fading red light. The cub pressed closer to her, purring in relief now that it was safe. Daniel realized something important. The cub was alive because of him, and the tigress knew it. But knowing did not mean trusting. Her muscles tensed, her tail lashed like a whip. She circled him once, slow, each paw silent yet powerful. Her gaze never left him, testing, measuring. Daniel held his breath, sweat sliding down his neck. Every second felt like a knife pressed against his skin. When she stopped circling, she stood directly in front of him, towering like a wall of fur and steel. The cub made a soft noise, placing its small paw on her leg, as if calming her. The tigress blinked once, slowly, and then, without warning, roared. The sound blasted through the trees, echoing like fire in the sky. Daniel staggered back, covering his ears, his chest shaking from the force. But the roar was not followed by claws or teeth. Instead, she turned sharply, pushing her cub ahead of her. Her tail swayed, her growl fading as she moved back into the shadows. The forest swallowed them, and silence returned. Daniel gasped, his knees weak, his whole body trembling. He had survived again, not by strength, not by weapon, but by something else. The tigress had chosen not to kill him. Why? He did not know, but he felt the answer was tied to the cub and the food he had given. Daniel sank to the ground, his heart still racing. The trees around him glowed faintly, their blue light shimmering like cold stars. The silence was thick, yet he could feel her presence still. She had not gone far. She was watching. He whispered to himself, "She could have ended me, but she didn't." The thought was both a comfort and a warning. That night, Daniel built a small fire in a hollow space under the trees. The flames were weak, the smoke curling into the sky. He ate the smallest piece of ration he had left, still thinking about the tigress. The cub's eyes, the way it had looked at him with both fear and hope, stayed in his mind. And the mother's roar, deep and commanding, echoed again in his memory. She had spared him, but it was no kindness. It was a decision. She was not just an animal. She was something greater. As the fire burned low, Daniel closed his eyes. The silence of the forest wrapped around him. broken only by the distant call of strange creatures. But in his heart, he felt it. He was being watched, judged, measured. The tigress had left, but her presence was not gone. And deep inside, Daniel knew the truth. This was only the first encounter, and the next one would decide far more than his own survival. Test of trust. Morning came with a pale red light, rising over the alien horizon. Daniel woke with stiff muscles and dry throat, but his first thought was not about food or water. It was about her. The tigress, the massive mother who had spared him. He remembered her eyes, sharp and alive, and the way she had chosen to walk away. Why had she not killed him? He wondered, and what did that choice mean? He packed his small bag and began to walk again, searching for water. The forest was alive with strange sounds, some like whistles, some like grinding stones. Every step he took, he felt eyes on him. He knew the tigress was not far. She had left a warning, but not a goodbye. He was inside her territory now, and the air itself felt heavy with her presence. Hours passed, the sun burned red above, and Daniel's throat grew tighter with thirst. Finally, he heard a faint trickle, the sound of water. Pushing through the glowing trees, he found a small stream, its surface shining like silver. He dropped to his knees and drank, the cold taste filling him with life again. But just as relief touched him, he felt the ground shift under his palms. A deep rumble rolled through the earth. He lifted his head slowly, his heart already racing. Across the stream, on the opposite bank, she stood, the tigress, her stripes glowing faintly under the strange sunlight, her cub by her side. Her yellow eyes were locked on him, and the growl that left her throat was not just sound, it was a question. Daniel froze, water dripping from his lips. The cub tilted its head and gave a soft sound, almost playful. But the tigress did not relax. She stepped closer, her claws scratching the soil. She was testing him again, and this time it was not about food. It was about respect. Slowly, Daniel stood, his hands open. He did not move closer. He did not run. He simply stood across the water from her. The tigress growled louder, lowering her head. Daniel's instinct screamed to back away, but he held his ground. Something inside him whispered. If he ran, he would lose everything. If he showed fear, she would see him as weak prey. The cub chirped and jumped toward the stream, splashing in the shallow edge. The tigress snapped her jaws, warning it back, then turned her gaze again to Daniel. The cub was safe, but she wanted to see what Daniel would do. Would he cross into their side, or would he stay away? Daniel slowly reached into his bag, pulling out another small piece of ration. His hand trembled as he placed it gently on a rock near the water's edge. Then he stepped back, raising both hands to show he had no weapon. The tigress's ears twitched, her tail flicked, her body tense like a drawn bow. The cub sniffed the air, then scampered to the rock, grabbing the food in its small mouth. It chewed happily, its glowing eyes turning toward Daniel with something close to joy. The tigress did not move, not yet. She watched Daniel, her growl fading to silence. Her chest rose and fell with slow, powerful breaths. Then, for the first time, she did something unexpected. She lowered her head, dipped her tongue to the stream, and drank. Daniel blinked, realizing the meaning. She was showing him, if you respect the boundary, if you share, you may live. But the test was not over. When she finished drinking, she raised her head and let out a sharp roar. The cub leapt back to her side, food crumbs still on its mouth. The tigress stepped forward, crossing the stream in 2 great strides. Daniel stiffened, his heart pounding. She came close enough that he could smell her hot breath, close enough that he saw the scars across her chest. She circled him again, slow and deliberate, her body brushing against the trees. Daniel forced himself not to flinch, not to run. The tigress stopped behind him, her growl vibrating in the air. Her cub gave a small cry, and for a moment, nothing moved. Then Daniel felt it, a heavy weight, the tigress's nose pressing against his shoulder, sniffing deeply. His body turned cold, every muscle screaming in fear. But he stayed still, letting her test him. After a long moment, she pulled back, her growl fading to silence. With a final glance, the tigress walked past him, her cub trotting behind. They disappeared into the glowing trees, leaving Daniel shaking but alive. He collapsed to the ground, his breath ragged, his chest tight. This was no simple meeting anymore. This was a ritual, a trial, a test. And somehow he had passed. He looked at the empty ration bag in his hand. Half of his food was gone, given to a creature that could kill him at any time. But deep inside, he felt something strange. He was no longer just a lost man on a dead planet. He was part of something larger, something alive. The tigress was not only testing him, she was teaching him, and the next lesson would be far more dangerous. Strange signs in the night. Night came quickly on the alien world, the red sky fading into deep purple, then into black. The glowing trees lit the forest with soft blue light, making shadows dance like living things. Daniel sat near a weak fire, his back pressed against a rock. His body was tired, but his mind refused to rest. He could not forget the tigress, her piercing eyes, the roar that shook his bones. She had spared him again, but not out of kindness. It was a choice, a test, a warning. The fire cracked softly, but the forest was too quiet. Even the strange insect had gone silent, as if hiding from something greater. Daniel felt the weight of the night pressing on him. He looked into the darkness between the trees, and he saw them, two yellow eyes watching. His heart stopped, his hand reaching for a stick of fire. But then the eyes blinked and vanished. Was it her, he wondered, or something else? He tried to sleep, but every sound pulled him awake. A low whistle echoed far off, then a deeper rumble answered it. Not from the tigress. This was different, sharper, organized. Daniel sat up, straining his ears. The sounds repeated, like calls, like messages sent across the forest. They were not random noises, they were patterns. Something out there was speaking. Suddenly, a shape moved high above in the trees. Not the tigress, too small, too quick. A thin figure clung to the glowing branches, its body long and twisted, its eyes shining green. It watched Daniel for a heartbeat, then scuttled away into the dark. His skin crawled. There were more creatures here than he had imagined, and they were aware of him. He threw more wood into the fire, the sparks rising into the night. But the moment he did, the forest answered. From deep within the trees, a roar shook the ground. Not from one throat, but many. It was not the tigress this time. It was others different, a pack. Daniel's blood ran cold. Predators, he thought, and they are hunting. The silence that followed was worse than the roar itself. Every muscle in his body screamed to move, to hide, but there was nowhere safe. He gripped the sharpest rock he had, though he knew it was useless. Then, from behind him, came another sound, a soft rumble. Not hostile, but heavy, familiar. Daniel turned slowly, and there she was. The tigress stood at the edge of the firelight, her cub by her side. Her fur shimmered in the blue glow of the trees, her eyes burning like suns. Daniel froze, unsure whether she had come to kill him or save him. The cub mewed softly, looking at Daniel, then back at its mother. The tigress growled, not at Daniel, but at the forest beyond. And in that moment, he understood. The pack was not hunting him alone. They were hunting her cub too. The night cracked with distant howls, closer now, circling. The tigress stepped forward, standing between Daniel and the dark. Her tail lashed, her claws dug into the soil. Her growl grew deeper, vibrating through the ground. Daniel's breath caught. She was not just warning the predators. She was telling him, "Stay behind me." Daniel crouched low, clutching his stone. His fire flickered, casting wild shadows that stretched like monsters. The calls of the hunters echoed again, closing in from every side. The cub whimpered, pressing against its mother's leg. The tigress roared, a sound so loud the trees shook. The forest answered with more growls, dozens of them. They were outnumbered. Daniel's heart pounded. He was about to witness a war in the dark. But then something strange happened. The glowing trees began to pulse, their light flickering like beating hearts. The hunters howled again, but this time their voices trembled. Daniel saw green eyes scatter back into the shadows, afraid. The tigress's roar had not only warned them, it had summoned the forest itself. The strange world seemed to respond to her presence. The hunters retreated, their calls fading into the distance. Silence fell again, heavy and endless. Daniel collapsed back to the ground, his chest rising and falling fast. The tigress turned her head slightly toward him, her glowing eyes sharp. She had saved him again, but also something more. She had shown him the truth of this world. He was not the only stranger here. There were rules, signals, powers he did not understand, and she was part of them. The cub chirped softly and looked at Daniel, almost with a smile. The tigress gave a low rumble, then faded back into the dark. Her shape disappeared, but her presence remained. Daniel stared into the glowing trees. His fear was now mixed with wonder. This was no empty world. It was alive. It was intelligent. And somehow, he was now inside its secrets. Bond of survival. The sun rose pale and red, spilling light over the glowing trees. Daniel's fire was cold, his body stiff from the long night. He rubbed his eyes, remembering the hunter's howls, the strange signals, and the tigress who had stood between him and death. She had spared him once, tested him once, and now defended him against the dark. Why, he asked himself, why does she keep me alive? He walked slowly through the forest, weak from hunger, his bag almost empty. Every step felt heavy, but he pushed forward, searching for berries, roots, anything he could eat. The forest was silent at first, then alive with whispers, branches cracking, unseen creatures watching. Daniel knew he was never truly alone here. The world itself breathed around him. And somewhere close, she was watching too. At midday, Daniel stumbled into a clearing. He froze, his heart pounding. Across the open ground, another predator stood, nothing like the tigress. It was lean, long, its body covered in black spines that pulsed with green light. Its mouth opened wide, dripping clear fluid that hissed when it hit the soil. Its eyes locked on him, cold and hungry. Daniel's body screamed to run, but he knew there was no escape across open ground. The beast lowered its body and leapt. Daniel raised his arms in panic, holding only a sharp stone. But before it struck, a roar exploded through the air. The sound shook the ground, cutting through the clearing like fire. The black-spined predator twisted midair, crashing onto the soil with a hiss. Daniel stumbled back, his eyes wide. The tigress had arrived. She charged from the trees, her massive form slamming into the predator with crushing force. Claws raked, teeth tore, roars and hisses filled the clearing. The predator shrieked, spines stabbing at her side, but her thick fur turned most aside. She struck again, jaws closing on its neck, shaking it until the sound of bone snapped. The predator fell silent, its body twitching once, then still. Daniel stood frozen, the stone still in his hand. The tigress turned her head, her fur marked with green burns where the fluid had touched her. Her yellow eyes glared at him, sharp and unreadable. He felt the weight of her gaze like a command. She had fought not just for her cub, but for him too. The bond was no longer accident. It was survival. The cub bounded into the clearing, chirping excitedly. It nuzzled against its mother, then turned to Daniel, tail flicking. Daniel let out a shaky laugh, though his throat was dry. "I guess I owe you again," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. The tigress gave a low growl, not of anger, but of warning. She dragged the dead predator aside and tore into its flesh. The cub joined her, feeding with sharp little teeth. Daniel watched, hunger twisting his stomach. Then something happened he did not expect. The tigress stopped eating and looked at him. Her eyes burned bright, but not with rage. With a low rumble, she nudged the carcass toward him, just a fraction. Daniel blinked, stunned. She was offering him food. He hesitated, the smell burning his nose, the sight turning his stomach. It was raw, alien, strange, but it was life. His hand shook as he tore a piece free. He held it close, his heart pounding, then forced himself to chew. The taste was bitter, metallic, nothing like Earth's food, but it filled his mouth with strength, his body with fire. He swallowed, gasping, and for the first time since the crash, he felt alive again. The tigress watched, her growl softening. She licked her cub's head, then returned to feeding. Daniel ate slowly, his mind racing. She had shared her kill with him. It was not just survival now, it was something more, a silent pact. Hunter and stranger, predator and prey, no longer enemies. When the meal was done, Daniel stepped back, his chest heavy with strange emotion. The cub came close, brushing against his leg. He froze, then slowly lowered his hand, letting it sniff his fingers. Its small nose twitched, then it purred, pressing against him. The tigress growled once, but did not stop it. Daniel felt his throat tighten. In this hostile world, he was not completely alone anymore. The sky darkened again as evening came. Daniel sat by a new fire, his stomach full, his body no longer weak. In the distance, he saw the tigress and her cub resting beneath glowing trees. She did not hide from him now. Her eyes flickered in the shadows, always watching, always deciding. Daniel whispered to himself, "She saved me, and I saved her cub. Now we share the same fight." The bond of survival had been written in blood, and the night ahead promised new trials, new dangers. But for the first time, Daniel felt a spark of hope, the silent understanding. The forest was calm after the battle, but Daniel's mind was not. He sat near the fire, watching sparks climb into the glowing trees. The tigress rested nearby, her cub curled against her side, their eyes half closed but never fully asleep. She had saved him, shared food with him, and yet she remained untamed, unpredictable. Daniel felt the distance between them like a line in the soil, thin, fragile, but alive. For hours he sat in silence, his gaze locked on her. Every flick of her tail, every twitch of her ears told him something. She was not like the predators he had seen before. She was more. Her eyes did not just look at him. They studied him, weighed him, questioned him. And he realized something. She was trying to understand him, just as he was trying to understand her. The cub rose first, stretching its small legs, and trotted toward Daniel. Its silver fur shimmered under the blue glow of the leaves. It sniffed his bag, pawed at his boot, then sat down beside him as if he were family. Daniel froze, his heart pounding, but then he slowly reached out. His fingers brushed its fur, soft, warm, alive. The cub purred, pressing closer. Daniel let out a shaky laugh, his throat dry. For a brief moment, he forgot the danger, forgot the hunger. He felt human again, but the tigress's growl reminded him. She lifted her head, her yellow eyes glowing in the dark. Her gaze locked on his hand, resting on the cub's back. Daniel pulled his hand away, but she did not move. Instead, she blinked slowly, once, then lowered her head again. It was not permission, but it was not rejection either. It was something in between. The night deepened, filled with distant calls of unknown creatures. Daniel's fire burned low, and the cold crept into his bones. He shivered, pulling his torn jacket tighter. The cub gave a soft cry and scampered back to its mother. The tigress shifted, curling her massive body around it, protecting it from the chill. But then she raised her head and stared at Daniel again. Her eyes caught the weak firelight, bright and unblinking. Daniel whispered, "You're watching me, aren't you? Testing me even now." She did not answer, but her silence was its own message. The next morning, Daniel tried something different. He gathered fruit-like pods from a nearby tree, cracked them open, and placed them on a flat stone between himself and the tigress. Then he stepped back, waiting. The cub came first, nibbling curiously at the pods. Daniel smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on the mother. The tigress stood slowly, her muscles rolling under striped fur, and approached. She sniffed the food, tasted it once, then pulled the cub gently back. Her growl was low, almost like a warning. Daniel frowned, then realized she was not only protecting her cub from danger, she was telling him the food was not safe. He stared at the pods, then at her, and for the first time, he wondered if she understood more than instinct. The day passed with quiet rhythm. Daniel walked, gathering what little he could. The tigress and her cub followed at a distance, never too far, never too close. He stopped once to drink from the stream, and she appeared on the other side, drinking at the same time. Her eyes never left him, but her claws stayed in the earth. They were no longer just strangers. They were shadows moving in the same path. That evening, as the forest grew dark again, the cub padded toward him, carrying something in its mouth. A strange fruit, glowing faintly blue. The cub dropped it near his feet, chirping proudly. Daniel blinked, stunned. It was bringing him food. He looked at the tigress, who sat in the shadows, her gaze heavy. She had allowed this, perhaps even taught it. Daniel held the fruit in his hand, its skin pulsing with faint light. He bit into it carefully, juice spilling down his chin. The taste was sweet, safe, real food. His eyes widened, his chest filled with relief. The cub purred louder, and for the first time, Daniel laughed without fear. The tigress growled once, low and deep, but it was not anger, not threat. It was something closer to approval. Daniel met her gaze, and in that moment, no words were needed. He understood. They were no longer enemies by chance. They were allies by choice. The forest around them was still dangerous, still filled with predators and mysteries. But here, between firelight and glowing trees, a bond had been formed. Not spoken, not written, but real. A silent understanding. The final choice. The days on the alien world passed like shadows. Daniel had grown thinner, rougher, but his eyes were sharper now. He had survived where no human should have, and not because of his strength. It was because of her, the tigress, and the silent bond they had built. She had tested him, saved him, shared food with him, and he had cared for her cub, risking hunger, risking death. They were no longer strangers, but something closer, something unspoken. One evening, the forest grew restless. The glowing trees flickered like failing lights, their blue shimmer fading in waves. The air thickened, heavy with static. Daniel felt the ground tremble under his boots. At first he thought it was another storm, but then he heard it. A low hum, mechanical, unnatural. It was not the sound of the forest. It was something from above. Daniel looked to the sky, and his breath caught. Through the red clouds, a dark shape descended, huge and silent. A ship, but not human. Its surface was black glass, shifting with patterns like liquid metal. Beams of green light swept across the forest, scanning, searching. The tigress roared, her cub pressing close against her leg. Her fur bristled, her eyes burning bright. Daniel's chest tightened. This was not a predator of the forest. This was something greater, something alien. The beams passed over Daniel, and the hum grew louder. The ship released small drones, insect-like machines that clicked and buzzed. They spread through the trees, their metal bodies glowing with green light. The tigress struck at one with her claws, shattering it in sparks. But more swarmed, dozens then hundreds. Daniel swung a burning branch, smashing one to the ground. But he knew this was not a battle they could win with claws or sticks. The drones circled tighter, driving them toward the clearing. The cub cried out, terrified. The tigress stood tall, her roar shaking the night. But even she hesitated. For the first time since Daniel had seen her, she looked uncertain. Daniel's heart pounded. If he did nothing, they would be taken, or worse. If he acted, he might not survive. The choice burned inside him. He searched his bag, fingers trembling. Inside was one last flare, a signal meant for rescue. If he fired it, maybe it would blind the drones, maybe even damage the ship's sensors. But using it meant exposing himself completely. The tigress and her cub might escape, but he would not. He looked at the cub, its glowing eyes wide with fear. He looked at the tigress, her body tense, waiting, watching him, and in that moment, he understood. The bond was no longer about survival. It was about trust. It was about choice. Daniel stood tall, holding the flare. His voice shook, but he shouted anyway, "Go." The tigress tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. Daniel lit the flare, the red fire bursting bright against the night. The drones turned instantly, swarming toward him, drawn to the heat, the light, the human who dared stand against them. He ran into the clearing, waving the flare high. The swarm followed, leaving the tigress and her cub behind. The tigress roared, her cry echoing like thunder. The cub cried too, its small voice breaking. But Daniel kept running, fire in his hand, machines at his back. Every second burned his lungs. Every breath was pain. He stumbled, fell, rose again. The drones closed in, sparks flying as claws of metal cut the air around him. With a final scream, he hurled the flare into the sky. It burst in a blaze of red light, brighter than the glowing trees. The swarm exploded after it, the ship's beams twisting, confused, blinded. Daniel collapsed to the ground, his body weak. He looked once toward the forest, where he saw them, the tigress and her cub, safe in the shadows, their glowing eyes watching. She did not move, not at first. Then slowly, she raised her head, her roar carrying into the sky. Not of rage, not of warning, but of something else. A promise. The drones scattered, the ship pulling back into the clouds. The hum faded. The night returned to silence. Daniel lay in the dirt, his chest rising with shallow breaths. The tigress stepped from the trees, her cub at her side. She came close, her massive form blocking the stars. Daniel's vision blurred, but he saw her clearly. She lowered her head, pressing her nose gently to his chest. A sound left her throat, not a growl, not a roar, but something softer, almost like mourning, almost like respect. The cub whimpered, pressing against Daniel's arm. He managed a weak smile, whispering, "Stay safe." His voice was barely a breath, but the tigress heard. She pulled back, her eyes bright with something deeper than instinct. And for the first time, Daniel felt certain. She understood him, not as prey, not as rival, but as ally, as kin, as something rare. The night closed around them, the fire dying. The forest whispered again, the danger gone for now. The tigress stood tall, her cub beside her. She looked once more at Daniel, then turned toward the trees. Her roar shook the world, not of warning, but of claim. The bond of survival was complete. A human had given his life for her cub, and she would never forget it.